and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining to STL's webinar for today, focused on how to build a real telco edge cloud, what every operator needs to know. I'm really excited to be joined on the webinar by some great panelists today. But what you'll see is the order of play here on the screen for what we're going to cover. We're going to start off by a presentation by myself, then we will hand over to a presentation from Luis from Nearby Computing, and he will tell you a little bit about their organization and what they've been doing in this telco edge cloud landscape, and then we will have a panel discussion for the second half of the webinar today. Very quick housekeeping that some of you may be used to. Just to give you a little bit of information, you should be able to see a control panel on the right-hand side, which you can expand or you can hide using what's being indicated as the orange arrow in box number 1 here on the screen. The main functionality that you might want to use is the questions box. That's in the control panel, which we're indicating with arrow 2. And in that box, you can type questions or comments, and we will go through those both live during the webinar as part of the panel discussion, but also we will share feedback after the webinar if there are any questions or comments that we're not able to get to. I'll only use first names when I'm calling out questions and thoughts from the audience, so you should be able to kind of speak freely and know that you're not necessarily going to be identified. You are, as attendees, muted, so if you want to communicate, then the way to go about that is in the chat box or in the question box. You won't be able to speak throughout the webinar. And one of the most common questions that we get throughout the webinar is, will I be able to see a recording? Will I get the slides after the webinar is completed? And the answer to that is yes. We will send you a recording, we will send you the slides, and that's something that you will be able to, to share and send around to any colleagues that you think might be interesting as well. So rest assured that that content will be coming your way after the webinar has concluded. As I mentioned, we've got great sort of set of panelists lined up and presenters for the webinar today. You have myself on from STL Partners, we have Luis from Nearby Computing, Christina from Telefonica, and Timo from Susi. And perhaps we will ask each of them to introduce themselves in a little bit more detail and talk a little bit about their organizations as they come on either to present or to take part in the panel discussion at the end. Before, however, we hand over to others to share some thoughts, you get a few thoughts from me and from the Edge team here at STL Partners to set the context around what we're hoping to talk about in the webinar today. So up top, I think one thing that it's worthwhile thinking about is, why are we talking about telco edge cloud in 2026? What is it that means that we think that this is an interesting area for telecoms operators to consider? And the first thing that I wanted to share is just a little bit of context about the health of the telco industry, particularly focused in EMEA for today's webinar. Well, what you're going to see on screen, first of all, is you're going to see the year-on-year revenue growth of some of the major EMEA telecoms operators that we have. And when you look at that year-on-year growth, what you'll be able to see is that actually most of the players experienced, some modest growth across, and this is sort of from the 2024 annual reports, so the most recent annual reports that are out there and published. So BT, Telefonica, Deutsche Telekom, Orange, KPN all experienced some modest growth. Swisscom not experienced a small decline. This was partly, I think, due to the timing of the Vodafone Italia acquisition that wasn't fully integrated by the time they published their annual reports in 2024. So I think this will see some recovery when we look at the annual reports as 2025 comes around. But yeah, these operators typically had some modest revenue growth, and in some ways you may see that as a positive picture. These guys are at least still on the growth train. However, when we put on this additional line, which is looking at the market inflation that was experienced in the specific main markets that these operators operate in. So in the case of Orange, for instance, this is looking at the market inflation rates in France. what you can see is that most of the operators' revenue growth actually sits below that line, which means that in real terms, they didn't necessarily experience significant revenue growth. In real terms, they actually underperformed what was just the market rate for inflation in their key market, only KPN in the Netherlands just peaking out above the top of that line. And the picture there is not great. What we are witnessing and seeing is that there is growth to be had, but the growth that we're seeing is often in adjacent markets and not necessarily in the telecoms market itself. So where we're identifying growth is in markets like data centers, which is currently seeing around a 10% year-on-year revenue growth rate, depending on the markets. We're seeing growth in cloud still some strong growth in cloud and in edge, so in more distributed compute, a market that's a little bit more nascent and growth rates of around 20% year on year. And clearly we're seeing really significant growth rates in the use of AI and artificial intelligence, and that is seeing growth rates estimated at around 25% year on year revenue growth. And so the question lends itself as to whether or not some of the telecoms operators can apply themselves to try and access some of the revenue growth that adjacent markets are experiencing. We are seeing some pockets of success where telcos are looking to do that. So if we think about those big EMEA operators that I was showing on the previous slide, well, what we saw from the 2024 annual reports is that Deutsche Telekom recorded 4% growth in their T-Systems cloud business, so more significant revenue growth than they saw across their business as a whole, and outperforming that market inflation in the German market. We saw, for instance, Telefonica experiencing 5% revenue growth from their enterprise BU, and they mention in their annual report Telefonica Tech in particular being the key driver, with double digits growth representing more than 40% of Telefonica's enterprise business revenues. And we also saw, for instance, Orange delivering significant revenue growth in cyber defense, in their cyber defense business, so their enterprise business focused on cybersecurity. So we do see that where operators are looking to tap into some of these areas that were traditionally slightly outside of their core, that is delivering them some revenue growth, which is welcome in the current market that they're operating in. And what we're going to focus on in the webinar today is one of those opportunity areas, which is looking at telco edge cloud, looking at the opportunity for telecoms operators to deliver distributed compute capacity for enterprise customers. And these numbers are from STL's network edge data center forecast, which is going to be republished for 2026 next week. And here we can track the steady growth that we have seen and that we expect to continue to see of telecoms operators deploying network edge sites to support enterprise compute capacity needs. What you can see on the left-hand side and in the blue bar on the left-hand axis and in the blue bar is the number of network edge sites deployed globally by telecoms operators. And then on the right-hand axis and in the orange, you can see the total forecast compute capacity. Now, some of those that are coming from perhaps the data center world may look at this and say that the capacity numbers here, so sort of 40 megawatts growing to perhaps 75 to 80 megawatts of capacity by 2030, is fairly modest, those that are used to speaking in gigawatts of capacity. But what is interesting here is that that capacity is split out over a very large number of sites and is providing a different type of compute landscape and compute option in comparison to the very large investments we're seeing, say, in the more centralized AI factory type of landscape that we've been seeing in the data center industry over the last few years. So that's the context. This is an area of potential growth that we think that telecoms operators should be looking to tap into. What we said that we would cover in the webinar is we said that we would cover this question around what is it that every operator needs to know about how to really build a telco edge cloud. And in my presentation, I'm going to tackle two questions. The question that I think comes up a lot about market demand for these types of services and how to make sure that investments that operators make match well that market demand. And I'm also going to touch a little bit about the competitive differentiator that a telecoms operator can bring into the compute or the cloud landscape. Then I'm going to hand over to Luis on the nearby side, who's going to tackle two other questions that we hear that telecoms operators often want to know. One which is around how can any efforts that you're doing into Telco Edge Cloud actually convert into meaningful new revenue streams. And then the last one about operationalizing and scaling those deployments. And particularly that's interesting for players who've, perhaps been testing with pilot sites at the network edge for some time and are interested in whether 2026 will be the year that we will see real commercialization and scale of the opportunity. So on the first question, market demand, how do we make sure that investments address this demand successfully? Well, the first thing that I would say here is that we can see from evidence of the hyperscaler activities that there is sustained market demand for more localized compute. On the left-hand side, you can see the deployment evolution of AWS local zones, which is their more localized compute offering. And you can see that they have continued to invest in launching sites, moving from just over 15 that they had in 2029 upwards towards over 30 that they are now looking to have deployed. So there is sustained demand that AWS is experiencing for this more localized compute. And on the right-hand side, you can see the announcement around Azure Extended Zones, which is their own version of a more localized compute offering. You can see in the blurb there some of the information about the latency sensitive and throughput intensive applications, approved data residency within boundaries that they are looking to target with this. And this is something that has been quietly relaunched by Azure in the last 6 months or so, with a couple of sites in LA and one in Australia as well. So we believe that there is some sustained market demand evidence for more localized compute being evidenced here by the plays that the hyperscalers are taking. We also know, though, that the market driver for why there is demand for this localized compute is shifting. When we first started talking about Telco Edge, there was a real focus on the network edge being able to deliver a latency benefit to customers. In our edge computing industry survey that we run each year, we have seen a shift in sentiment here. If you look at the dark blue boxes, you can see that reducing latency is still a significant reason why customers adopt edge computing. But the big change between our 2023 results and our 2025 results is actually in the red box at the bottom of the stack chart, where you can see the importance of keeping data local really growing as the years have progressed as the key driver, the main reason why customers adopt edge. So the market demand we think is sustained, but we also acknowledge that the reasons and the drivers behind that market demand is shifting. And of course, one of the key areas where we're seeing that we see now here in 2026 as a market demand driver is around the topic of widespread AI inferencing. And our perspective here is that as we see more and more widespread inferencing, specifically leveraging proprietary enterprise data sets, so not leveraging data from public domains, from the internet, as we've seen with ChatGPT, but really leveraging proprietary enterprise data, we think this is going to drive further demand for edge compute as we see that driver around keeping data local continuing to grow in importance. This is Eurostat data that just demonstrates that we are at the beginning of this from a market perspective. The average, European average for enterprises using AI technology in 2025 is only at 20%. So only 20% of European enterprises are using AI technologies today. And within that, what we're seeing is that of those 20% of enterprises that are leveraging AI today, a lot of them are leveraging the AI workloads around things like sales and marketing, business administration, in finance, in HR. And those types of AI workloads, that sort of AI inferencing, typically we see running in the cloud today. Where we're seeing less maturity, the bars in the orange, are bars where we believe that there may be a role for edge to help to support the inferencing workloads. So where we see that AI is running on production processes, where it's around R&D, logistics, even security. And so as we see those types of AI technologies being more widely embedded and adopted by enterprises, that's where we see that we think we'll see some sustained additional market demand from an edge computing landscape. The second question that was on my list to cover was around the competitive differentiator of telcos in this landscape. And two things I think to comment on here. One is to return to that question of latency that we raised earlier in the presentation. And what we have heard in the AI landscape is we've heard many of the key market makers and individuals discussing and re-bringing to the fore the question of latency in the context of AI inferencing. And what we would say here is that there is, and one of the reasons why this is being raised is in the presentation around competitive sort of differentiators for telcos, is that latency is something that telecoms operators deploying at the network edge really can control and really can deliver as an incremental benefit in terms of other alternatives. What we would say is that latency and AI inferencing is interesting, but only in certain types of applications. So where it is interesting, where it can provide a competitive differentiator for the telecoms operators, is where the network latency in the orange here is a big enough proportion of the total end-to-end latency that optimizing for it can make a meaningful difference in the application's performance. And I'll try and illustrate that with a quick couple of examples. So with ChatGPT, an AI application that runs very well in the cloud, we estimate that the application latency, the time it actually takes for ChatGPT to respond to a prompt, it can be, on average around 3.5 seconds. Network latency, we've said, let's estimate that at 35 milliseconds. What that means is that the network latency is less than 1% of the end-to-end latency experienced by someone doing a ChatGPT prompt. It means that optimizing for that less than 1% doesn't necessarily derive significant value for the end user. If, however, we look at a different type of application, an application like a computer vision application, we can see here that the application latency is much lower than for a large language model like ChatGPT. It takes only 10 milliseconds for the application latency to return an answer. In that case, the network latency becomes almost 80% of the end-to-end latency. And for these types of AI applications, optimizing for network latency can help to move the needle and drive a significantly differentiated customer experience. So we think that there is, for certain types of AI inferencing, a competitive differentiator for the telecoms operators to deliver on low latency AI inferencing. And then the second point around how can telcos differentiate is we think that there's a role that telcos can differentiate based on the depth of market penetration that they offer in comparison to competitors. If we look at a couple of key markets across Europe, United Kingdom, Germany, and Spain, the first thing that I'm going to show you here in the blue bars is the commercially available telco edge nodes in those markets available today. And in the UK, it's mainly AWS wavelength nodes deployed both by BT and by Vodafone. In Germany, it's nodes deployed by Vodafone and by Deutsche Telekom. And in Spain, very recently, we've seen the announcement in the last few weeks of 10 commercially available edge nodes deployed by Telefonica. And I'm delighted and excited to have Christina on from Telefonica to talk a little bit about that in the panel discussion. Then if we think about what's been announced, what's yet to come in terms of telco edge nodes in these markets, well, that's what I'm showing here in the orange bar. In the UK, we don't necessarily have announcements from operators that they are going to grow their telco edge deployments. In Germany, we do see that, and Telefonica, as part of that announcement I just mentioned, have said that they will have 17 nodes deployed by the end of this year. If we then map that against what have the hyperscalers got, if they are one of the key players where telcos are going to need to differentiate against, if we map what they have in each of those markets, that's going to be this red line that I show here. what you can see is that the hyperscalers have, combined across AWS, Azure, and Google. They have significant deployments in the UK, and particularly in Germany, where AWS has launched some additional nodes as a sovereign cloud proposition, again, just in the last few weeks. If we look at Spain, however, we can maybe start to see a telco edge proposition that's more strongly differentiating. In Spain, there's less penetration by the hyperscalers, and what Telefonica has already differentiates them from the hyperscalers based on the depth of the market penetration that they are offering, based on the fact that they are going to provide edge nodes that much more significantly penetrate the Spanish market in comparison to competitors. On top of that, we see the other key differentiators that operators can deliver being around that local enterprise support, particularly as they look to consider the right infrastructure for AI workloads, and a sovereignty angle. And we may discuss this a little bit as we move into the panel discussion, whether we as a panel and across EMEA feel that, for instance, US-based or headquartered hyperscalers truly can offer a sovereign proposition, or whether that's something that European operators are in a stronger place to offer. So that was a little bit on market demand and a little bit on competitive differentiation. I'm now going to hand over to Luis, and he's going to talk about these second two questions that we raised at the top of the webinar. So how can telcos create meaningful new revenue streams, and what needs to be in place to really operationalize and scale? Over to you, Luis.
Can you hear me now?
Can indeed.
Good morning to everyone, first of all. So if we move on to the next slide. So the next one, please. Trying to following upon Tilly's fillet during her presentation. And I have to say, based on my 25 plus years of experience in telco, working for an operator, deploying services and networks, and working at different suppliers, selling those products to the customers, we see three recurring questions from the telco around cloud services. The first one is, how much money can I make, or how to open new revenue streams by doing this? The second is, how much money can I save, or at least to keep my operational expenses under control? And the third one is, how can I differentiate myself from my competitors? And then maybe we can have a conversation about who is the competitor here. If we move to the next slide, please. So let's tackle the revenue. As for how to increase the revenue growth by using telco cloud services, we see four pillars that underpin the value proposition of the telco edge cloud within the telcos. The first one clearly is the legacy, the traditional services. I'm talking about IaaS, PaaS, those kind of services. In 2018, we thought that containers-based solutions would be dominating by now in 2026. And I have to say that as of today, containers and virtual machines-based solutions are coexisting on a multi-cloud environment for both private and public. This is the first pillar, traditional and legacy. The second pillar, and I think is the most important one, high added value services, but seen from two different angles. The first one is the time to market. By reducing it drastically, moving from the traditional implementation of a service from 12, 18 months, down now to a couple of weeks. That's the first angle. The second one is the service of the application per se. Any cloud platform must be able to support any kind of service, regardless of the customer, regardless of the sector. Of course, there will be preference depending on the type of customer and the type of sector, but it has to be agnostic. Once a customer in the US told me, I need to be ready for the unknown. And that described exactly what I just said. Going forward, AI, of course, needs to be part of the portfolio. Actually, is going to be one of the main drivers going forward in the future over the next years. This is the second pillar. The third one, I think, is the most interesting one. So we said that in your portfolio, traditional cloud needs to be there. However, what we are seeing is a transition towards a smart cloud by using network APIs. That will allow our telco customers to provide added value services using the intelligence from the network. This is new. The fourth pillar that we are seeing, I call it customer engagement. So give control to the customer as to service self-management by using different customer portals, the possibility that the customer can activate and deactivate, the services by themselves. This is another pillar that build, the value proposition for the telco around cloud. If we move to the next slide, please. The next one, of course, is how to control the expenses, the OpEx. In telco, there is a narrative that says cloud is complex. And when we say that it's complex, we think, well, it's bringing up our operational expenses and it makes it more costly. So here, this is where a good strategy orchestration play a key role in any type of cloud deployment. There is a common denominator, though, in the request from the customers as to how to integrate those cloud services. The first one is zero-touch provisioning or fully automated integration of the services. Here we are including the services and all the network functions included in the network, regardless of what is running underneath, either private or public. The second request is performance monitoring, carried out on a single pane of glass, with the possibility to integrate AI agents and props to fully automate the whole process. Really interesting also, and we are seeing a lot of picking up with our customers. All of this, though, requires pivotal changes in the current operational processes. So we are moving operations to a standalone or silos towards a more holistic orchestration approach, and that requires a change within the telcos. If we move to the next slide, please. The third one, how can I differentiate myself from my competitors? Here we need to talk about edge. Edge is a great opportunity for the telcos. No one else better than telcos knows how to handle and to manage all the challenges at the edge. We are talking about power, space, cooling, connectivity, topology, etc. In 2015, with 5G, we thought that the main drivers for us to move the services farther out to the edge or much closer to the customer was going to be the latency. As of today, the drivers we are seeing for us to move those services closer to the customer are sovereignty, understood or seen as a sovereignty in a country, a regional level, even on-prem. Second driver, data protection and confidentiality. Customers want to store key data on-prem. And the third one, trunking efficiency. For some applications that requires a huge amount of data to process, it tends to be more efficient to host those services on-prem or much closer to the customers. I'm convinced, fully convinced, nevertheless, that new services related to latency will come along very soon. If we move on to the next slide, please. Bottom line here, just two takeaways. The first one, in order for you to get the most of a telco cloud / orchestration, and we are talking about improving the time to market, streamline the operational processes, build open architectures that will allow you to offer any type of customer to the telco customer B2B. That will require to build long-term orchestration strategy alongside with your technology partner. Second takeaway from this, doing nothing is not an option. There is a huge opportunity to leverage all the infrastructure that the telcos are managing today to increase the revenues in B2B, and no one else better than the telcos can compete in that particular area on the edge. So if you have any question, please do not hesitate to contact us. And without any further ado, Tilly, back to you.
Thank you, Luis. And now I will welcome Timo and Christina as well. And perhaps what we will do just to start off is, Christina, I will hand over to yourself to introduce yourself, and then Timo to you to give a little bit of background on yourself and Susi, and then we will move on to some questions, both from myself, but also I will be weaving in some questions from the audience. So do feel free to share any questions that you have in the chat as well. Christina.
Yeah, okay, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this webinar. I'm Cristina Santana. I'm working in Global CTIO in Telefonica, and I'm the responsible of the Edge platform group. I'm also chair of GSMA Edge platform group, and also I'm leading the camera APIs that are for Edge capabilities, right? That is.
Timo?
Yes. Hello, everybody. My name is Timo Jokio. I'm telco field CTO at SUSE, and SUSE is a hardcore open source company. We only do open source, as people probably know. And my job at SUSE is kind of wide. I progress our journey at the telco industry, which is nicely on the way, with our cloud platforms and other tools like storage and virtualization and what have you, and also, of course, working with our partners like Nearby and customers like Telefonica and others to progress our business and visibility in this industry. But I also work quite a bit with industry forums like Linux Foundation Europe hosted Silva project, which is trying to advance the harmonization of cloud platforms in telco industry to make life easier for service providers and the workload vendors as well. So it's a wide area, but it's highly interesting and highly important, in my opinion.
Maybe we can stick with you for the first question, Timo, because it relates to what you just talked about in your introduction, which is I would be interested to hear your perspective on some of the underlying platform requirements for a telco edge deployment, like Luis and I have been describing, and maybe how and where you see that differing from cloud platforms, like what is fundamentally different from, you know, from a distributed compute perspective versus a more centralized perspective. And then, Luis, maybe I'll ask you the same from an orchestration and an automation perspective, but starting maybe, Timo, with you on kind of the platform level.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So that's an interesting question and important question. And from the platform development point of view, it's also interesting. But I have to say that we call our edge platform also a cloud platform, and it's important to note that the technology like containers and Kubernetes and Linux and what have you is the same as in centralized data center. The fundamental technology is the same, and it has to be the same to get consistency across all these things. Of course, edge has then its own let's say additions or requirements, like lower footprint, and in some cases even real-time execution environment, and all those things has to be implemented in the edge cloud platform. But also, and I'm sure Luis is going to talk about this much more than I do, but the end-to-end automation and large-scale automated deployments and automated configuration is a must. Otherwise, we cannot deploy and implement like even tens of thousands of edge sites, like in Open RAN, for example, which is a specific edge use case. So automation is a key, and end-to-end management is a key. And then, of course, there are tons of other things which we probably have not no time to talk about today, but those are the key things. And then on top of that, we need to make sure that when we have the same underlying platform technology, we need to have edge to the cloud integration. So edge is a thing of its own, of course, but it has to be integrated into centralized cloud platform or centralized cloud anyway. Otherwise, it's going to be a silo, and that's not a good thing.
Luis, Christina, thoughts that you would add on top of this? I expect, Luis, you have something from the orchestration perspective in terms of, yeah, kind of the underlying requirements of edge and how it might differ from a sort of cloud first strategy.
Absolutely. I think as far as the cloud, regardless of the type of cloud is concerned, is impossible to detach the orchestration from the infrastructure. So in particular in those projects where you need to scale out. So when you start, trying to deploy at a certain scale, orchestration is key. And that's why I think it's really important, and trying to emphasize during the presentation, that is gonna drive the decision. The first decision that you have to make is what my network is gonna look like in the future, and I need to go for it and work towards that objective. That's the first thing. In conjunction, and I have to say that partnership, and I'm talking about our customers and the ecosystem, that we need to partner, that we need to work really close to them, partner with them, not call them customers anymore. We need to partner with the customers and the ecosystem, and working towards that objective. That is essential for the success of the project.
And maybe to make this a little bit less, or to bring it into the realm of the realities of a deployment, Christina, what can you tell us, or maybe just if anybody missed the news around Telefonica's recent announcement, could you give the overview of what you guys have shared to the market that you are working on and have deployed already today?
Yeah, well, as you can see in the press release, we already have 10 edge nodes in a commercial environment. I would like to highlight what Timo said, right? For us, the edge deployment they are not silos. I mean, our idea is that from a unique point of view, the developer could deploy an application in a centralized cloud, in an edge, or maybe, the application is divided in different modules, and maybe that application has a database that has no latency requirements or has no edge requirements and could be deployed in a centralized way. And then there is the backend of the application that can be deployed in the edge. So what we would like to provide to our customers is, from a unique point of view, from a unique portal, the capability of deploying it in a centralized cloud, in an edge, or even in hyperscalers or in private networks. I mean, the idea is to provide a continuum, a cloud continuum to our customers, because it's really, really important what Timo said. The edge could not be silos, right? Everything has to be orchestrated, and maybe some part of the application are going to be centralized and others are going to be distributed in our network, right? Yeah.
And Christina, one thing that I suspect some of the operators, maybe the other European operators who we saw have deployed maybe 1 or 2 or 3 sites across their countries, I think one of the things they will want to understand is what sort of market demand you're seeing at Telefonica for that even deeper penetration, commitment to 17 sites by the end of the year. I know you guys have made an initial announcement about one of the customers that you are working with, which is in the train transport space. Could you talk a little bit about that, about why that has, why the confidence from Telefonica that this is going to be something that delivers kind of depth of opportunity for you guys, and how that translates into the market demand you've seen as you've launched these 10 sites?
Yeah, I mean, as you just mentioned it, we are going to have 17 edge sites. That is the same number of communities. I mean, we call comunidades autónomas, I mean, regions that we have in Spain, right? Our idea is to be able to distribute the edge sites to provide to our customers really low latency and also sovereignty, right? I think that you mentioned it before. Right now in the European Union, there is a really big push about sovereignty. So we would like to provide to our customers also this capability. Regarding our press release with this train provider that is called CAF, we have performed a proof of concept joining the edge network slicing and 5G capabilities. Here the idea is that the train has a camera, and with computer vision is sending information to the edge, right? So we need real-time process to be able to analyze the image and take decisions, right? So for CAF and for our customer was really important the latency, that is one thing that was mentioned, and also the distribution of the loads, right? Regarding the market demands, well, right now, you know that it's in the press release, we have deployed this 17 edge node based on European funds on IPCIC's project. There is right now increase of the demand based on artificial intelligence. Tilly, you also mentioned it before in your presentation. I mean, there are some use cases right now about computer vision, about XR glasses, about gaming, I mean, a lot of things, but what we think really that is going to push the deployment of these edge nodes on these distributed clouds is, of course, the artificial intelligence.
I have awesome, very interesting and excited to see what else comes out of, of the program that you're doing as you share more and more about the customers that you're working with and onboarding onto the platform. And I had a couple of questions that are coming in from the audience now. I will ask them generally to the panel and see whether anybody fancies taking them on. One of the questions is about and perhaps, Luis, it's something that you may have an opinion on, because I wonder whether the question comes from what you were talking about managing kind of the cost, the OPEX and the CAPEX side of going after these new opportunities. They're asking about, what is the strategies telcos are taking about, building new sites, sort of self-building for the edge, converting old sites, even, maybe leasing and working with existing sites and running private cloud in sites that, a third party might provide, and, and sort of how telcos are basically weighing up that strategy from a sort of an investment perspective against what they want to see from a growth and a revenue perspective. I think there's a range of strategies going on by the operators, but does anybody on the panel want to kind of comment on what they're seeing from that sort of, how does a telco balance its balance sheet when pursuing these new revenue opportunities?
Okay, let me take that one. So it's not easy though.
Never is. That's why we're here.
So I think we are seeing a kind of hybrid scenario, and using the word hybrid as we are not going to see one single operator building one single strategy across the board. We are seeing, depending on the demand, depending on the needs from the customers, telco customers in the particular case, we are going to see a difference or kind of different flavors on how our customers are going to deploy the telco cloud. So there is no one single answer to that, because of course, in particular, when we enter in edge sites, because of all the limitations, all the challenges that they have to face in terms of cooling, power, energy. So all of these factors needs to be considered before they build the cloud network or the telco cloud network. That said, and as far as the orchestration is concerned, I think one of the beauties is that we have the possibility, technically, something that didn't happen in the past, that we can manage different scenarios regardless what is running underneath. We are going to see multi-cloud, both private, even different flavors of public networks. So we are talking about Amazon's, Google's, Microsoft's. So we are, the underlying network that is going to build, including the site, is going to be one of the factors. It might change. The orchestration, though, it has to be must be the glue that can support all the services that is running underneath, and that's the most important thing. Trying to have this holistic approach where basically, regardless what is going to happen, from the sell side perspective or from the technology perspective with the infrastructure, clearly orchestration needs to have a holistic approach in the way that we implement it.
And maybe one for you, Timo, although I suspect, again, it's been raised by me and Christina and Luis already, so maybe you guys want to add something afterwards. Is this question around sovereignty and sovereign AI as maybe a newer but really fundamental driver, particularly within Europe, probably particularly in the geopolitical situation that we're in. Someone raised the kind of European defense sort of spending and the the kind of the security and compliance and control around defense and how that moves this space. I'd be interested in your take on how important sovereign AI, or how key that is as a driver for telco edge strategies at the moment. And I think Susie has had some interesting announcements on sovereign AI in the last few weeks as well. So it'd be good to get your sort of take on that topic and how it's moving this market.
Yes, of course. So sovereignty, of course, it's a big topic nowadays. It has been already quite a while, and it's getting more and more important. And I'd like to touch that first from sovereign cloud point of view, and then talk about AI a little bit. But But so European Commission is putting a lot of money on this topic. I mean, funding the projects, and we are part of a couple, I think, major projects with a lot of other companies to build over time build a federated sovereign European-wide cloud, which will be hosted by service providers, telcos in the countries. And the idea, a great idea, is that eventually that European-wide sovereign cloud would be, as I said, federated, which means that it will be compatible between the countries, so that you can basically throw your your workload anywhere in Europe and it always works. And of course, it has to be sorry, centrally managed, centrally orchestrated, and which is an important topic which we already discussed. So I think it's a it's a great thing that European Union is putting a lot of funding into this topic, which is important, and that of course includes both edge and AI sovereignty as well. It is a big topic, and of course we as SUSE, we are in a great position because we are a European company. We are clearly European company, and we announced the sovereignty tool, as you rightly mentioned. So it's a good position to be right now. We like that, and of course this brings me back to the Sylva project, which I already mentioned earlier, which is Sylva project is open to anybody. I mean, globally, but it's driven heavily by the European service providers, Telefonica included, Orange, Vodafone, Telecom Italia, Deutsche Telekom, and so forth, and the European equipment providers, Nokia and Ericsson. And we have been part of that exercise since the day one, actually day -1, I would say, in the beginning. And it's we will be, not just us, but other people in this European sovereign cloud project. We will propose Sylva as a base for European sovereign cloud. And we of course work closely with our customers in Sylva context, and our own platform is very tightly aligned how Sylva stack looks like. They are not exactly the same. They cannot be, because Sylva is an open source project, and they have their own, release cadence and own governance rules. So it cannot be exactly the same. But our strategy is to keep our SUSE Telco Cloud as closely aligned with Sylva as ever possible. So it was a long talk, but little bit touched the sovereignty as well, and AI is there. AI, sovereign AI, of course, is an important topic within the edge and the central cloud as well.
So if I may here, and just to complete what Timo just said, as of today, technically, because during the presentation we were focused on sovereignty, seen as a intra-country, per region, as Christina mentioned. However, there is a lot going on across Europe, funded by European Union, where basically we fix the possibility to interconnect different clouds across different countries within Europe. Federation is one of them. I think technically we are getting there. I think the only point that is still open is the business plan, from the commercial side, how to tackle those sovereignty interconnections between or across different operators within Europe. Christina knows more than me about this.
Yeah, if I can add here more information, I mean, from Telefonica, the edge is not only having a bigger distribution of the clouds, it's also providing an add value services to our customers, right? And how we are going to provide these add value services is mainly focusing two basic capabilities. The main one is the tight integration with the network. I mean, be able to, we use an orchestrator, an operator platform, and that in our case is a nearby solution that could deploy loads in the cloud, but could also be integrated with the network. Why? To be able to take information from the network and provide these add-value services to our customer. An example of this, if we have only one centralized cloud, the final customer with their device, mobile phone or XR glasses or whatever, know which is the but where is the backend where it has to be connected, right? But what happens when we have 17 edge nodes and the final customer is moving, for example, a train, right? How we can know which is the optimal edge site to be connected. So for that, we have a tight integration with the network. I mean, it's not only distribute the loads, it's also take the information of our telco networks to be able to provide and add value services that right now the cloud providers could not give because they don't have this information, right? This is one key topic that because there was some question from Julie about how we can differentiate with the current public cloud is not only distributing the cloud, is also providing these add value services with the integration of the network and the federation that Luis and Timo mentioned it, right? We are working with different telcos, with different cloud providers to federate our telco edge platform. In this case, is the operator platform talking with the other different operator platforms. So exactly the same that I explained before, that from a unique point of view, the idea is to provide to our customers the capability of deploying in a centralized cloud, but also in the distributed edge. We are going to provide also the capability to deploy in all the different clouds and telcos in the European Union. So the idea is to imagine federate Telefonica with other operator, and then a customer in our case use our platform to be able to deploy the application in our footprint, but also in the footprint of other cloud providers. Could be cloud providers or could be telco cloud providers. I mean, this is not only telcos, it's also for cloud providers. Indeed, we are working in an open source community that under the umbrella of Neonefos open source community in the Linux Foundation, and we are working together also with nearby India Federation Manager. I mean, to be able to have an open solution to everybody, to be able to have the most number of telcos and cloud providers possible federated between us.
Next time, Christina, I try and present that slide, I will use some of what you just said to better explain that competitive advantage. I think that was really useful and interesting from the perspective of not just that the differentiator is network latency, but also it's the coupling of the network and the compute and bringing the information together to make one optimize the other. And I think that's a piece I missed from my presentation that you have now brought out much more eloquently in this panel discussion. We don't have too long left, maybe just a couple of minutes. So perhaps I will throw the last question over to you, Luis, which is, we're hearing lots of interesting and exciting things from Christina and Timo. I know that Nearby is involved in lots of other pilots and deployments that you can't necessarily talk about. I would be keen to understand where you think 2026 is going to take us from a telco edge perspective, and for those operators that perhaps haven't necessarily lit the world on fire with their edge strategies yet, what are you expecting them to do, and how are you expecting the market to respond in the next year or so to things like the announcements from Telefonica, the funding from the European Commission, and kind of the push that we're seeing, or to really make this something that operationalizes?
Really encouraging signs. Actually, as Christina said, just recently announced the operator platform project, which is for us is a key milestone. The importance for two reasons. The first one is the first one with this current scope. We will see more coming up, in the future, I'm sure. but also other players are looking into it exactly with the same concept. We are going to see more projects coming up, despite the fact there are two aspects that we need to consider. The first one is from the cloud perspective, edge, we are at the very beginning. So we are talking about 17 sites deployed by Telefonica. I'm sure that others will join in the near future, deploying others. However, I have to say that the key component or as part of the organic growth in a telco, the connectivity is still there. And also the orchestration and the cloud native can be connected to connectivity services, which is something that already the operators are doing and trying to get revenue from as well. So in that sense, we are seeing two kind of threats. The first one is traditional services, including connectivity. Mobile private networks are picking up. We are seeing a lot of interest and also creating value, the possibility to add any service to that customer, including the connectivity. That's a plus for the customer. The second one, and it's back to what we are talking about, is the edge, the deployment on the edge. Clearly, we are seeing more and hopefully more new customers in Europe are going to join these initiatives, because as I said, doing nothing is not an option. We need to make sure that we deploy those services, and it takes time. So I really need to emphasize the fact that since we started planning, designing, and implementing this, it takes over a year, even longer, to get it done. So it takes time. So therefore, customers need to understand that for that requires a proper planning, a proper strategy, what to do with the whole ecosystem. Really important.
Awesome. I know we are at time, so I will say thank you so much to Timo, Christina, and Luis for joining me today. As I said at the top of the call, we will share the recording and the slides if you missed any of it. And we really appreciate you all taking the time out of your day to ask great questions and listen to what we have to say. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.